Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, O you who have believed, decreed upon you is fasting as it was decreed upon those before you so that you may become righteous. As we discussed last week, we already very briefly touched on the merits behind fasting during the month of Ramadan and the blessings which are available for us to grasp onto and to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So today, inshallah, I'll talk a little bit more about these blessings, but also talk about the etiquettes and the akhlaq of a person who is fasting during the month of Ramadan. As I mentioned last week, the purpose of fasting in Shahr Ramadan is not just to abstain and to stop eating and drinking during the daytime during this month. There's a lot more to it, and if one simply refrains from eating and drinking but continues to do all the other sins which are found in a person, then it can be said that a person's fasting has been almost worthless and that they have just used this month to starve themselves. And as our teacher Imam Kumayl has said, if the month of Shahr Ramadan ends and no actual change occurs in your actions and in your behavior, then you should know that your fasting has not been fulfilled, and the point of your fasting has not been fulfilled. So when we talk about akhlaq and the etiquettes during the month of Ramadan, we should start off by discussing some of the recommended and mustahab actions which have been told to us that we should be carrying out in this month to help enhance our deeds. And this means that we can try to follow the recommendations that are given by our spiritual leaders and guides to help us get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is ultimately the purpose of this month. The first recommended action is the recitation of the Holy Quran. And there's a hadith by Imam al-Baqir who says that every single thing in this world has a season. And the season of the Holy Quran is the month of Ramadan. The second recommended action is dua. And of course we have a narration from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who says that indeed there is a granted dua, there is a dua which is accepted for every fasting person at the time where they break their fast. And this means that at the moment where we are breaking our fast, when we are praying Salat al-Maghrib, to make dua, because this is the perfect time for us to speak directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to get our wishes granted. One of the actions which is also recommended is to endeavour in worshipping, not just to take worship as a task and a ritual which we do without thought or purpose. This is the best month for us to prove to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are trying and we are striving with everything we can in order to show Him that we want to worship Him and to prove ourselves, because He is the most worthy of worship. The fourth recommended action is to hide the fact that we are fasting unless we are asked about it. And again, this helps us show our humility. We don't want to go about boasting to other people, for example non-Muslims, that we are fasting and that we are abstaining from eating and drinking. This should be something which we don't boast about and which we keep to ourselves. And this act is best when it is done in secret, just the same as charity. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that giving charity in open is good, but giving charity in secret is even better, this also applies to the concept of not only fasting but other good deeds. Of course, it being done in public is something which is okay, it's something which is good, but when it is done in secret and when we don't seek to gain the material respect of people in this world, then it's even better for us. One of the other mustahab actions is to wear perfume for people, but not in front of strangers when it comes to ladies, for example. And we have a narration from the Holy Prophet who says that perfume is the gift of a fasting person. The person who is fasting and perfumes himself to make himself smell nice to other people, this is one of the gifts that we have. Another recommended action, which of course speaks for itself, is to feed the fasting people. Again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that whoever feeds someone who is fasting will have the equivalent reward. And what we can also interpret this is as feeding the poor as well. During this month where we are not eating ourselves, we should dedicate all of this food that we would be eating towards people who may need it. As we mentioned, there are hadith that say that the purpose of Ramadan is for the rich people to feel the pains of the poor people who can't eat. And of course the people who are feeding fasting believers as well, this is an even greater reward, as Rasulullah mentioned, and so it is recommended to donate so that the food can be served in the Husayniyah for people as well. Again, one of the actions which is very important for us to take heed of, especially when we're in the house and especially when we're in the Husayniyah, for example, is not to break the fast until after Salat al-Maghrib. The reason for this is that a person will be able to gain more thawab and more good deeds and blessings from doing their salah in a state of fasting rather from when they have broken their fast. And the exception for this is, of course, unless the person physically cannot tolerate to keep fasting through the salah. For example, if they have low blood pressure and they feel dizzy and they should eat before. However, Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam has narrated in this regard that it is better in Shahr Ramadan to pray than break your fast, unless there are people waiting for you to break your fast, and then you should not disagree with them. So this is the Imam himself saying that it is better for you to pray whilst in a state of fasting rather than to break your fast and then pray. The Imam continues on, he says, break your fast with people if they're waiting for you and then pray, otherwise you must offer your prayer first. And two of the companions came to the Imam and they asked him, why is praying before breaking your fast more virtuous? Why is there more blessings in this? And the Imam replied to them, this is because the time for two obligations has arrived. The first obligation is obviously to break your fast, and the second obligation is for you to pray salah. And the Imam says, I would prefer to begin with the more virtuous and the more beneficial of these obligations, and this is prayer. Obviously salah is much more virtuous, so when you are praying whilst you are still fasting, your salah will be written as the salah of a fasting person, which is more desirable. And this is what the Imam says. When you're talking about the etiquette of a fasting person, we also need to talk about the things which they shouldn't do or which they are not recommended to do. And the first one of these is disputing or arguing and swearing as well, the use of bad language or the use of your voice in a way which is not beneficial to those around you. And as we mentioned, fasting should not just be the concept of not eating and not drinking during the day. It should be to stop using foul language, to stop using swear words, and to stop pointless arguments as well. Of course, it's difficult for a person who has not been eating all day. Their tempers become short, they become more aggressive. But the purpose, as we mentioned, of Shahr Ramadan is to learn self-restraint, as the Holy Quran says. When you're in this hungry state, you should be restraining yourself from doing these things. And the Holy Prophet has said that the best action that you can do in this month is to restrain from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forbidden for you to do. And again, he goes on and he says that when you are fasting, you should let your ears, your eyes, your hair, your skin, and all of your body fast too, not just your stomach. He says, do not let your fasting day be the same as a non-fasting day. This means that when we are 11 months out of the year and people are committing these sins, they shouldn't carry them into the month of Ramadan as well. They should use this month as an opportunity to stop and then to continue this on after the month ends as well. And on this topic, there's a relevant narration, relevant hadith which I want to mention, which is when the Prophet said to Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, one of the great Sahaba, the Prophet said to him, Ya Jabir, this is the month of Ramadan. Whoever fasts during his day and spends a portion of its night saying his prayers and abstaining from eating anything haram, safeguarding his modesty against anything which is haram, and withholding his tongue against saying anything haram, then we will leave his sin behind him as this month leaves. Jabir replied to him and he said, Ya Rasulullah, this is a beautiful narration which you've just told me. And Rasulullah then said to him, and what difficult terms these are. What Rasulullah is telling us here is that during this month, stopping all of these difficult haram actions which we've become accustomed to is not something which is easy. It's actually very difficult, especially because we get into the process of normalizing these things. They become so prevalent in our everyday lives that we become accustomed to carrying out these actions. So he says this is difficult, but the end goal is so much worth it. The second thing which is not recommended for us to do is to be reading poetry in this month, except for the poetry which is dedicated to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. This is a month where we should be aiming to detach ourselves from all material things, except detaching ourselves from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the Prophets, and from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. And lastly, one of the things which I wanted to mention, which is not recommended for you to do, is to give blood or to do anything which makes the fast weak. Of course, donating blood is one of the noble actions, and it's something, in fact, that we do every Muharram especially, and it's something which, as Muslims, we should be doing every 3 months. But especially in the month of Muharram, we donate our blood, and we say this is for Abu Abdullah. However, the reason for it being discouraged during the month of Ramadan is actually to protect a believer, to protect a person who is fasting. Because as you know, during this month, you're weaker, you're more tired, you do not have as much energy, and it's a strenuous time, and so it's recommended for us not to do these things in order to protect ourselves. And the reward for doing the recommended actions and from abstaining from the makruh and the haram actions is so beautiful, it's so powerful, and it's something which we should be looking forward to every single moment of every single day. In Safinat al-Bahar, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is quoted saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in charge a group of His angels with the task of making dua for those people who are fasting, not only from food and drink, but from swearing, arguing, and from doing any other unlawful actions. And on the very same page of the same reference for that quote I just mentioned, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is quoted to say that if a person, for example, is fasting during a very hot day and he begins to suffer from the feelings of thirst as a result of this fast, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will assign to him 1,000 angels. And what they will do is they will wipe his face and they will convey to him glad tidings and blessings. And when he breaks his fast, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will address him with the following words. He will say, "How sweet your smell and your soul are, O my angels, bear witness that I have forgiven this person." This is what we can look forward to if we utilize this month in the correct way, and if we abstain from all the haram actions which we have become accustomed to. It's actually worth pausing just to think about the reward which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself promises us if we carry out these actions. So it's important that we keep our stomachs hungry and thirsty, and we make our bodies used to hardships and used to difficulties, because then it gives the opportunity for your heart to have a chance at seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's glory. And I just want to very briefly touch on the different types of fasting, which I need people to think about and to reflect on as well. And you need to think about which type of category you're about to fit in, because there are 3 different types of fasting which they mention. The first one is the fasting of an everyday common person, the fasting of a normal person. And this means that they stop eating and drinking, and they observe their salah more than they normally do, as described in the books of fiqh. The second type of fasting is the fasting of a more noble person, in which, in addition to him refraining from eating and drinking, what he also does is he includes stopping of the sins, for example, sinning of his eyes, of his ears, of his tongue, and other of his body parts from transgressing. And this is the next stage. However, the best stage and the best category of fasting is this. It is the most distinguished one, which distinguishes people of this caliber and this quality from the normal people who just don't eat and drink. And this type of fasting mentions everything which I talked about, the refraining from all of the sins. However, it also includes stopping everything, whether halal or haram, which makes a person's mind negligent from remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to conclude, it must be our eyes, it must be our ears, and it must be our tongues and hands which also fast with us. These all must come together, and all the bodily parts must be observant of the fasting during Shahr Ramadan. All of these body parts should refrain and abstain from performing actions which should not be performed in this month. And a person should avoid, for example, over talking or talking too much, and he should practice silence during these days so that he can avoid the sins of the tongue, for example. And he should not forget the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who has said that the renunciation of eating and drinking is the easiest thing which has been made compulsory and wajib upon the fasting people. The fact that you are not eating and drinking during this month is the easiest of the things which you should and shouldn't be doing. So we need to pay attention to the other things which are important as well. And to finish, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant victory to the mu'mineen and the mazlumeen, and for all the shuhada, especially in Gaza and Palestine, and for the Hajj Sha'ab in Iraq. Please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.